9 out of 10 investors are making this mistake right now. Not someday. Right now. While they check their portfolio and nod like everything's fine. Here's the strange part. You probably won't recognize it in yourself. The people doing it feel confident. They feel like they know exactly what they're doing. Let me ask you something honest. When you bought your last stock, why did you buy it? Because the price had dropped and felt like a bargain? Or because everyone was talking about it and you didn't want to be left behind? If either of those is the real answer, even a little, you've already made the mistake. The one that quietly drains wealth from smart, hard-working people over decades. Not through some dramatic crash, through 1,000 small, reasonable-sounding decisions. I'm not here to scold you. I made this same mistake myself, back when I thought I understood the market better than I actually did. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly what this mistake is, why almost everyone falls into it, and how to stop. Stay with me. So let's name it. Let's put it on the table where we can both look at it. The mistake is this. Most investors buy a stock because of its price, not because of its value. And I know how that sounds. Price, value. Aren't those the same thing? That's exactly the trap. That's exactly why 9 out of 10 people fall into it without ever noticing. Price is what you pay. Value is what you get. Those two things can agree with each other, or they can drift apart for years. And most people never stop to ask which situation they're actually in. Think about it this way. If a coat that normally costs $200 goes on sale for $50, most of us feel a small thrill. What a deal. But if that coat is torn, missing buttons, falling apart in the rain, is $50 really a deal, or just a lower price on something that was never worth much? The stock market plays this same trick every single day. A stock falls from $100 to $40, and something in our brain lights up. That's 70% cheaper. That's a bargain, buy now. But the market doesn't drop prices out of generosity. Prices drop because something changed. Sometimes it's temporary. Fear, a bad quarter, a scared crowd selling before they understand why. And sometimes it's real. The company's foundation is cracking, debts are piling up, competitors are eating its lunch, and the falling price is the market quietly telling the truth before most people are ready to hear it. The investor who buys only because the number got smaller is not investing. He's guessing. He's mistaking a lower price for a better deal. The same way a man might buy a rusted-out truck because the sticker says $1,200 instead of $10,000, without checking if the engine still runs. And on the other side of the same coin, there's the second version of this mistake. Buying because the price is going up. This one feels different. It doesn't feel like fear. It feels like opportunity, like being part of something everyone else already sees. Your neighbor mentions a stock at a barbecue. Your brother-in-law made 40% in 3 months. The financial news repeats the same 5 names until they feel less like companies and more like certainties. So you buy. Not because you understand what the company does. Not because you've looked at what it earns or what it owes, but because the price is climbing. And you don't want to be the only one standing outside the party. This is what I mean by bossing based on price instead of value. It's letting a number on a screen make your decisions for you, instead of asking the only question that matters. What is this business actually worth? And is that price a fair trade for it? Value, real value, comes from something much less exciting than a stock chart. It comes from a company's ability to earn money year after year and to keep earning more as time goes on. It comes from how much debt sits on its shoulders, how strong its position is against competitors, how much cash it generates once the bills are paid. None of that shows up in a 5-second glance at a rising or falling number. It takes digging, patience. Here's a comparison I want you to hold on to. Imagine two houses on the same street. One is freshly painted, has a manicured lawn, and neighbors talking about how the price just jumped. The other looks tired, needs a new roof. Most people driving by will feel drawn to the first and feel nothing at all for the second. But a person who knows how to evaluate a house doesn't stop at what he sees from the street. He checks the foundation, the plumbing, the wiring. Sometimes the pretty house on the rise is built on cracked concrete. Sometimes the tired house has bones stronger than anything else on the block, and a fresh coat of paint is all it would ever need. That's what separates buying on price from buying on value. One person sees the paint, the other checks the foundation. I want to be honest with you. I bought a stock once because it was cheap. Just cheap. It had fallen so far, it felt impossible not to bounce back. I didn't check why it had fallen. I didn't look at what the company still did, or whether it had a reason to exist in 5 years. I just saw a low number and told myself a story about how low it was. It kept falling, until one day the company wasn't cheap anymore. It was gone. That lesson cost me real money, and it taught me something no article ever could. A falling price isn't a signal to buy, and a rising price isn't a signal that you're right. Price tells you what the crowd is feeling right now. Value tells you what's actually there, underneath the noise, whether anyone's watching or not. And once you start seeing the difference between those two things, you can't unsee it. You stop asking, is this cheap? And start asking, is this good? And is the price fair for how good it is? That single shift is worth more than almost anything else I could teach you today. But knowing a mistake exists isn't the same as understanding why it keeps happening, even to smart people, even to people who've read the same books you have. That's what we need to look at next. Because this mistake isn't really about numbers. It's about something much older, sitting quietly in the back of your mind. So why does this happen? Why does a mistake this simple, once you see it, keep catching people who are otherwise sharp, careful, successful in every other part of their lives? Because this was never really a math problem. It's a wiring problem. And the wiring isn't broken. It's ancient. It's the same wiring that kept our ancestors alive on the savannah, built for a world of lions and tribes and immediate danger, not for a world of quarterly earnings reports and blinking red numbers on a screen. Let's talk about the first piece of that wiring: anchoring. Your mind grabs onto the first number it sees and treats it like gravity. Like a fixed point, everything else has to be measured against. If a stock once traded at $100, that number burns itself into your head. It becomes normal. So when the price falls to 60, your mind doesn't ask what the company is actually worth today. It just whispers, "This used to be $100, 60 must be cheap." That whisper feels like reasoning. It isn't. It's an anchor, dragging your judgment back to a number that may have nothing to do with reality anymore. I've watched grown men, successful men, hold on to a stock for years, past the point where it made any sense, simply because they remembered what it used to be worth. Not what it was worth now. What it used to be. They weren't investing in a company anymore. They were investing in a memory. The second piece is loss aversion, and this one runs deeper than most people realize. Study after study has shown the same thing. The pain of losing money hits us roughly twice as hard as the pleasure of gaining the same amount. Losing $1,000 doesn't feel like the opposite of gaining $1,000. It feels far worse, and that imbalance quietly rewires how you make decisions. It's why people hold on to losing stocks long after every rational sign says to let go. Because selling makes the loss real, permanent, undeniable. And some part of us will do almost anything to avoid that feeling, even if it means losing more. And it's why people sell winning stocks too early, locking in a small gain out of fear that the market might snatch it away, when the company underneath was only getting started. You're not managing your portfolio in those moments. You're managing your feelings and dressing it up to look like strategy. Then there's the third piece, and this is the one that moves markets, moves crowds, moves history: the herd instinct. We are social creatures before we are rational ones. For most of human history, staying close to the group meant staying alive, standing apart from the group, questioning what everyone else already believed. That could get you left behind, or worse. That instinct didn't disappear just because we started trading stocks instead of hunting together. It just found a new stage. You felt it. Everyone has. The sense that if this many people believe something, if this many smart people are buying, there must be something to it. And for a while, that feeling is rewarded. The price keeps climbing. The story keeps getting told. Until it isn't. Until the thing everyone believed turns out to have been built on nothing, but everyone else believing it too. History doesn't just suggest this. It proves it, over and over, like a rhyme that never quite stops repeating. Go back to the late 90s, when ordinary people, some of them careful and conservative their whole lives, poured savings into companies with no profits, sometimes no real product, because the story was exciting and the price kept rising and nobody wanted to be the one who missed it. Barbers were trading stocks between haircuts. Retired school teachers were checking tickers before checking their mail. The herd ran together, and for a while it felt like flying. Then the story ran out of road, the way stories built on nothing always do, and a great many of those same careful conservative people watched years of savings disappear in months and never fully understood why. It wasn't stupidity. That's the part I need you to really sit with. It wasn't a lack of intelligence. Some of the smartest, most disciplined people you'll ever meet have been swept up in moments exactly like that one. It was biology. It was the same ancient wiring, doing exactly what it evolved to do in an environment it was never designed for. And here's the quiet, uncomfortable truth underneath all of it. None of us are exempt. Not you, not me. The wiring doesn't check your IQ or your bank balance before it switches on. Doctors have been swept up in it. Engineers. Retired accountants who spent 40 years being careful with other people's money. The only real difference between the investor who gets swept away and the investor who doesn't isn't intelligence. It's awareness. It's knowing the current exists before you're already caught in it. Which brings us to the part of this conversation I actually care most about. Not just naming the trap, but showing you the ground solid enough to stand on instead. So let's build that ground together. Not a complicated system with 40 steps you'll forget by Friday. Just a few honest questions, the kind a careful man asks before he hands over his money to anything. A business, a partnership, a piece of land, because that's what a share of stock actually is. Not a ticker symbol, not a chart. A small piece of a real business with real employees, real customers, real bills to pay. The first question is simple, and it's one most people skip entirely. What does this company actually do? And could you explain it to your grandson in one sentence? If you can't describe how a business makes its money in plain language, you have no business owning a piece of it, no matter how exciting the chart looks. This isn't about being simple-minded. Some of the most successful investors in history built entire careers on refusing to buy anything they couldn't explain in a sentence or two. It kept them out of more trouble than any formula ever could. The second question is about earnings, and this is where a number called the price-to-earnings ratio comes in, PE for short. Don't let the name intimidate you. All it's really asking is, for every dollar this company earns, how many dollars are you paying to own a piece of that? If a company earns $2 a share and the stock trades at $20, you're paying 10 times earnings. If it trades at $60, you're paying 30 times earnings for that same $2. Neither number is automatically good or bad. A young, fast-growing company might deserve a higher multiple because its earnings are expected to grow quickly. A mature, slow-moving company should usually trade at a lower one. What matters is comparing that number to similar companies in the same industry and asking yourself honestly whether you're paying a fair price for what you're actually getting, or paying for a story about what the company might become someday. The third question is about growth, and specifically, revenue growth. Is this company actually selling more, year after year, to real customers who keep coming back? A company can look profitable for a while through cost-cutting alone, trimming and trimming until there's nothing left to trim. But cost-cutting has a floor. Growth doesn't. Not for a company that's actually building something people want. Look at the last several years of revenue, not just the last quarter. One good quarter tells you almost nothing. 5 years of steady, patient growth tells you a great deal about the character of a business. The fourth question, and this one gets ignored more than any other, is debt. How much does this company owe, and to whom? A business that grows using its own earnings is standing on solid ground. A business that grows entirely by borrowing is standing on a ladder that someone else is holding, and that person can decide to let go whenever they choose. When interest rates rise, when a bad year comes, heavily indebted companies are the first to buckle, sometimes taking careless shareholders down with them. You don't need to become a forensic accountant. You just need to glance at how much debt sits against how much the company actually earns and ask whether that debt looks like a tool or a trap. And the fifth question, the one I think matters more than any single number: what protects this company from its competitors? Every successful business eventually attracts imitators, people who see the profits and want a piece of them. What keeps those imitators from simply copying the winning formula and stealing the customers away? Maybe it's a brand people trust without thinking twice. Maybe it's a network that gets stronger every time someone new joins it. Maybe it's a cost advantage so deep that no new competitor could match it without losing money for a decade. Businesses without any of that tend to erode slowly, the way water wears down stone, even while everything looks fine on the surface. Put these 5 questions together, and you have something far more powerful than a hot tip from a barbecue or a headline promising the next big thing. You have a framework, not a guarantee. Nothing in this world comes with a guarantee. but a way of thinking that puts the odds back in your favor. Instead of leaving your money at the mercy of a crowd's mood on any given Tuesday, write these 5 questions down somewhere you'll actually see them again, on a card in your wallet, on a note by your desk, not because you need to memorize them like scripture, but because the next time your finger hovers over a buy button, these are the questions that should be running through your head instead of the noise. I want you to notice something about all 5 of these questions. None of them ask what the price did yesterday. None of them ask what your neighbor thinks, or what's trending, or what some voice on television is shouting about this week. They all point you back to the same place, the actual business, standing quietly underneath all that noise, waiting for someone patient enough to actually look at it. Now I want to slow down for a moment, because there's something underneath all of this that spreadsheets and ratios can't capture, and if we don't talk about it honestly, everything I just told you stays theoretical. Numbers on a page, a framework you'll nod along to and then forget by Thursday. Here's what I mean. This mistake, buying on price instead of value, letting fear and crowds make your decisions, it doesn't usually cost you everything in one dramatic afternoon. That's not how it works for most people. It's quieter than that. It's crueler than that, in its own way. It costs you a little at a time, year after year, in decisions that each felt reasonable in the moment they were made. You're not 25 anymore. Neither am I. And that changes something important about this conversation that I don't want to skip past. When you're young, a bad decade in the market is a bruise. Painful. But there's time to heal, time to earn it back, time for the next 20 years to quietly correct the last one. But for those of us on this side of 40, the math is different. And I think you already feel that difference even if you've never said it out loud. Time isn't quite the unlimited resource it used to feel like. Every dollar lost to an impulsive decision isn't just a number. It's a year you might not get back, a trip you might not take, a cushion that might not be there when you actually need it. I say this not to frighten you, but because I think most financial content aimed at your generation either talks down to you like you're careless, or talks around this truth entirely because it's uncomfortable. You deserve better than either of those. You deserve someone willing to say plainly, the stakes are real, the time matters, and that's exactly why getting this right, starting now, today, matters more than it would have 20 years ago. I think about my own father sometimes, a man who worked with his hands his whole life, who trusted the wrong voice at the wrong moment late in his career, and watched a good portion of what he'd built quietly evaporate in 18 months. He never talked about it much. But I saw what it did to him. Not just the money, the confidence, the sense that he'd understood something he actually hadn't. He went back to work 2 years past when he'd planned to retire, and he never fully forgave himself for it, even though, honestly, the mistake he made was the same one 9 out of 10 people make. He just made it at the wrong moment in his life to absorb it. That's the real cost of this mistake. Not just the number on the statement. The years. The plans quietly rewritten. The retirement pushed back. The trip canceled. The conversation with your spouse that starts with, "So about the account." But here's the other side of that same coin, and I want you to feel the weight of this too, not just the warning. Every principle we've talked about today, understanding value instead of chasing price, recognizing the biases working against you, asking real questions about a real business before you hand over real money. None of it requires being a genius. None of it requires starting over. It requires patience and it requires a willingness to slow down at the exact moment your instincts are screaming at you to move fast. That's not a small thing. That's actually the whole game, when you strip away all the noise. The investor who wins over decades isn't usually the smartest person in the room. He's the one who developed the discipline to ask the boring questions when everyone else was chasing the exciting answer. He's the one who could sit still while the crowd ran past him, and trust that sitting still, when it's the right call, is its own kind of courage. You've already survived enough in this life to know that the loudest voice in the room is rarely the wisest one. You know that patience, real patience, the kind that doesn't flinch when things get uncomfortable, is something you build through practice, not something you're simply born with. Everything we've covered today is really just that same wisdom, the wisdom you've already earned in every other area of your life, applied to a part of your life where the noise has been drowning it out. I want to give you the other side of my father's story too, because it matters just as much. A friend of his, a woman who ran a small hardware store for 30 years, went through the exact same crash. Same year, same falling market. But she'd spent 3 decades doing the boring, unglamorous work of actually understanding what she owned. Small pieces of steady, profitable businesses she could explain in a sentence, bought at prices that made sense, held through years that felt uneventful because nothing dramatic was happening. When the crash came, her portfolio dropped too. Everyone's did. But she didn't sell in a panic, because she'd never bought on a story to begin with, and there was nothing but noise to panic about. She retired on schedule. Nobody wrote a headline about her. Quiet, boring discipline rarely makes the news. But it's the version of this story I want for you, and it's the version that's actually available to you, starting with the very next decision you make. Let's make this real, though, because a framework you never actually use isn't worth much more than the story it was supposed to replace. So let's walk through it together, right now, the way you'd actually do it if you sat down this weekend with a cup of coffee and one stock you already own, or one you've been eyeing for a while. You'd start with that first question. What does this company actually do? Not the elevator pitch some analyst wrote. The plain truth. Does it sell a product people need or want badly enough to keep paying for? Does it provide a service that would be genuinely difficult to walk away from? If you find yourself reaching for buzzwords instead of plain description, that's worth noticing. That's often the first sign the price, not the business, is what actually attracted you. Then you'd look at the earnings, the PE, and compare it honestly to 2 or 3 competitors in the same space. Not to find the cheapest one and celebrate. Just to understand where this company sits relative to its neighbors. Is it priced like the steady, reliable one? Or is it priced like the exciting story everyone's betting will keep climbing? There's nothing wrong with either, as long as you know which one you're actually buying. And why. You'd check the revenue trend, 5 years if you can find it, and ask whether the growth feels earned or borrowed. Earned growth comes from more customers, more demand, a widening reason for people to choose this company over another. Borrowed growth comes from accounting choices, one-time gains, numbers that look good on paper this year, but have no roots holding them in place for next year. You'd glance at the debt, compare it to what the company earns, and ask the tool or trap question. And you'd think for a moment about what actually protects this business from the next ambitious competitor who wants what it has. None of that takes a finance degree. It takes maybe 20, 30 minutes, and it takes something harder to come by than time. The willingness to actually slow down before you act, instead of after. I think about a woman I know, mid-50s, sharp as anyone I've met, who used to make every investment decision the same way. She'd hear something on the news, feel a spike of urgency, and buy before that feeling had a chance to fade. She wasn't reckless by nature. She was busy, and urgency felt like efficiency. It felt like not missing out. It took her years and a few expensive lessons to realize that urgency and opportunity are not the same feeling, even though they can feel identical in the moment. What changed for her wasn't a smarter strategy. It was a rule. One simple rule, the kind that sounds almost too plain to matter until you actually live by it. No purchase the same day she heard about it. 24 hours, minimum, between the impulse and the action. In that 24 hours, she'd ask the 5 questions. Sometimes the answer was still yes, and she'd buy with far more confidence than before, because now she actually understood what she owned. Sometimes the answer was no, and she'd saved herself from a decision that urgency alone would have talked her into. That one rule didn't make her rich overnight. Nothing does, and I'd be lying to you if I promised otherwise. But it changed the shape of her decisions, one at a time, in a direction that compounds. And compounding, more than any single stock pick, is the real quiet engine underneath every story of patient, long-term wealth you've ever heard about. Not luck. Not a hot tip that paid off once. The slow, unglamorous accumulation of good decisions, made calmly over years, while other people were reacting to whatever the market happened to be feeling that particular Tuesday. That's the shift I want for you. Not a personality transplant. Not becoming someone who never feels the pull of fear or excitement. You will, because you're human. And that wiring we talked about doesn't disappear just because you understand it now. The shift is smaller than that, and more achievable. It's building one honest pause between the feeling and the action. That pause is where every principle we've covered today actually gets to do its work. I'll tell you something else that woman said to me once, and it stuck with me longer than most advice does. She said the 24-hour rule didn't just change her portfolio. It changed how she argued with her husband, how she responded to bad news at work, how she handled her own kids when they came to her upset about something. Once you build the muscle of pausing before reacting in one part of your life, it has a strange way of showing up in every other part too. The market just happened to be where she noticed it first, because the market gives you a scoreboard. Most of life doesn't. I'm not telling you to adopt her exact rule, word for word. Maybe yours is different. Maybe it's a checklist you keep in a drawer. Maybe it's a phone call to someone you trust before any purchase over a certain size. What matters isn't the specific mechanism. What matters is that you build something, anything, that sits between the impulse and the action, because that gap is where 9 out of 10 investors lose the game before they've even realized they were playing it. If you're still here with me, this far into the video, I want to say something. And I mean it plainly, not as a formality before the next sponsor read. Most people don't make it this far. Most people click away in the first 2 minutes, chasing something shinier, something that promises a faster answer. You didn't. That tells me something about you, that you're the kind of person who's willing to sit with something long enough to actually understand it, instead of just feeling good for 30 seconds and moving on. That's rare, and honestly, it's exactly the kind of patience we've been talking about this whole time. So if this conversation has been worth your time, I'd genuinely appreciate it if you subscribed and joined us here. We put these videos out regularly, walking through exactly this kind of thing. Not hype, not hot tips, just honest, grounded conversations about building something real with your money. At a stage of life where getting it right actually matters. If that sounds like something you want more of, the button's right there, and it costs you nothing but a click. And I'll tell you honestly, a lot of you watching this are probably sitting on a decision right now. Maybe it's a stock you bought because a friend mentioned it. Maybe it's one you've been afraid to look at closely because some part of you already suspects what you'll find. I've been there. Most people who've been investing more than a few years have been there. There's no shame in it. The only real shame is knowing better now and choosing not to look anyway. So let's go back to the content, because there's one more piece of this I haven't given you yet, and it might be the most important one. Everything we've covered today, the mistake, the psychology behind it, the framework to fix it, all of it lives or dies on one final ingredient, and it's the one almost nobody talks about, because it's not exciting enough to put in a headline. That ingredient is consistency. Not the one perfect decision, not the single stock that changes everything. The willingness to apply these same 5 questions, this same 24-hour pause, this same patient discipline to every decision, not just the ones that feel important. Because here's what I've noticed. Watching people build real wealth over decades instead of chasing it over weekends. It's never one brilliant move. It's never a secret nobody else knew. It's the same sound judgment, applied quietly, again and again, long after it stopped feeling new or interesting. It's showing up the same way in a boring year as you do in an exciting one. It's asking the same 5 questions about a stock everyone's talking about that you'd ask about one nobody's ever mentioned. Most people can follow good advice for a week. Fewer can follow it for a year. The ones who actually build something lasting are the ones who can follow it for the 10 or 20 years it actually takes to matter, without needing applause along the way, without needing anyone to notice. That's not a flashy conclusion. I know that. But I'd rather give you something true and slightly unglamorous than something exciting and false. And if you've made it this far in this video, I don't think you're looking for exciting and false anyway. I think you're looking for exactly this. Something solid enough to actually stand on for the next 20 years, not just the next 20 minutes. Let me give you something practical to carry out of this video, because I don't want any of this to just sit in your head as an interesting idea you agreed with for an afternoon and then never touched again. Before you close this video, I want you to think of one stock. Just one. Something you already own, or something you've been circling for a while without pulling the trigger. And I want you to actually run it through the 5 questions we walked through earlier. What does it do, in one sentence? What's it priced at relative to its earnings and relative to its neighbors? Is the growth earned or borrowed? Is the debt a tool or a trap? And what actually protects it from the next competitor who wants what it has? You don't need a spreadsheet for this. You don't need to open 10 browser tabs. Just sit with those 5 questions honestly for whatever that one stock is, and notice what you find. Sometimes you'll find a business that holds up beautifully under that kind of scrutiny, and that's a good feeling, a kind of confidence that a rising chart alone could never give you. And sometimes you'll find you don't actually know the answers, that you bought or you're considering buying based on a feeling, a headline, a conversation at a barbecue. That's not a failure. That's information. That's exactly the gap we've spent this whole video learning to notice. I'll say this too, because I think it matters as much as anything else in this video. None of this is about becoming cold or turning your back on instinct entirely. Instinct built on decades of hard-won experience is worth listening to. What we're guarding against isn't feeling. It's letting feeling substitute for looking. There's a difference between a gut sense that's been earned through years of paying attention and a gut sense that's really just fear or excitement wearing a disguise. The 5 questions are how you tell those two apart. So here we are, back where we started, in a way, though I hope it doesn't feel quite the same as it did an hour ago. 9 out of 10 investors make this mistake. I told you that at the very beginning, and I asked you quietly whether you might be one of them. I didn't ask that to make you feel small. I asked it because that question, sitting with it honestly instead of brushing past it, is the whole difference between the investor who keeps repeating the same story every few years, chasing the next bargain, jumping on the next crowd, and the one who finally steps outside of it, once and for all. You now know what the mistake actually is. Mistaking a moving number for the truth about a business. You know where it comes from, that old wiring inside all of us, built for lions and tribes, doing its best in a world of tickers and headlines it was never designed to understand. You know the 5 questions that pull you back to what's real. And you know that none of it works without the one ingredient that never makes headlines. The willingness to pause, to look, to choose consistency over excitement year after year, long after it stops feeling new. I think about that word, consistency, and how unglamorous it sounds next to everything the market tries to sell you. Nobody makes a documentary about the investor who asked good questions and waited patiently for 2 decades. But I'd bet everything I own that if you sat down with the people who actually built lasting wealth, quietly, the kind that's still standing when they hand it to their kids, you'd find that word underneath almost every one of their stories, even if they never said it out loud. There's a certain kind of quiet that comes with getting this right. Not the loud, celebratory kind you see in advertisements, someone throwing their hands up on a mountaintop because a chart went their way for 1 good year. A different kind. The quiet of checking a statement and feeling nothing dramatic at all, just a steady sense that things are where they should be. The quiet of a conversation with your spouse about the future that doesn't have an edge of fear underneath it. The quiet of sleeping through a market downturn instead of lying awake refreshing your phone at 2 a.m. because you already know what you own, and you already know why you own it. That kind of quiet doesn't announce itself. It doesn't get applause. But if you've lived through the other kind, the kind built on hope and headlines and hoping nobody asks you to explain your reasoning, you already know how much that quiet is worth. You've earned enough in this life to recognize the difference between a peace that's real and a confidence that's just noise wearing a nicer outfit. My father never got to hear something like this. Nobody sat him down before that year his savings disappeared and walked him through 5 honest questions. He learned the hard way, the way a lot of people in his generation did, and he carried the weight of that lesson quietly for the rest of his life. I think about him sometimes when I make these videos. I think about the version of him that might have existed if someone had just slowed him down for 20 minutes before he handed his trust to the wrong voice. I can't go back and give him that, but I can give it to you. That's really all this was. Not a strategy, not a secret. just 20 minutes, offered honestly, to someone who might still be standing at the edge of the same decision he was standing at, without even knowing it yet. What you do with it now is yours. I won't pretend I know your situation, your accounts, your specific worries at 3 in the morning, but I know this much. The next time you feel that pull, that itch to buy because the price dropped or because everyone else already did, you'll hear something now that you didn't hear before. A small, quiet voice asking what the business actually is underneath the number. That voice is worth more than anything else I could have given you today. If this found you at the right moment, I'd ask 2 things. Follow the channel so we can keep having conversations like this one, week after week. The same way we talked today about consistency mattering more than any single brilliant move. And if you know someone standing near that same edge, a friend, a sibling, someone in your family who's about to make a decision out of fear or excitement instead of understanding, send this to them. 5 people, if you can think of 5. It costs you a minute, and it might save someone a decade. And before you go, leave a comment, an honest one. Tell me where you actually are with your own money right now, not the version you'd tell your neighbor. And tell me what you want me to walk through with you next. I read every one, and the next video usually starts with something one of you said in a comment just like this. I'll see you in the next one.